Ben Bigger is one of my favorite characters in Zenless Zone Zero. This gentle giant is what got me into the game, and I made it my mission to fully invest into this character, having maxed out everything on him, from his level to skills, and I even got his W engine maxed out on the first banner he was available in. It was a small price to pay nonetheless, but I had to make sure that I could solidify myself as the Ben Bigger player. My point is that I literally spent money to get this character fully maxed out on day one of Shoutout's banner, and I've still been using him to this day. So if anyone could tell you whether or not he's worth using in 2025, it's me. It really isn't though, but it's me. I've already made an in-depth guide going over everything Ben does, so a link to that will be in the description. But let's go over everything that has changed since the game released. Now, before we move forward, I do want to take the time to shout out another Zenless YouTuber who also specializes in Mr. Bigger. Rakaruk has some great videos of him clearing endgame content with his hypercarry Ben, and I do suggest you go ahead and check them out. He's done way more calculations and planning about stuff like multiplicative stats, rotations, team synergy, stuff that I could barely scratch the surface with if I tried to. So, if you want the nitty gritty on how to build a pure DPS Ben, you should definitely throw him a subscription. That being said, this video is about Ben's overall usage in the current state of the game and whether or not he's worth investing into. So I will be referring to him as his intended role as a supportive sub DPS rather than a hypercarry character. If you do want to build him as a hypercarry bear, Rax got you covered with this video here, which will be linked in the description too. Let's carry on though. Since Shoutout's banner, we've only gotten two other defense agents in the game. Seth, an electric NEPS officer, and Caesar, the physical leader of the Sons of Cadlon. Both characters came with their respective W engines, Peacekeeper Specialized and Tusk of Fury. 4 new sets of disk drives have also been added to the game: Protopunk, Chaos Jazz, Branch and Blade Song, and Astral Voice. General content in the game has been streamlined as well, adding a new mode to Hollow Zero and effectively making the only game mode where Ben shined in obsolete. The Endless Tower and Deadly Assault were also added as extra endgame content. How well does Ben hold up in these modes? Let's talk about the W engines and disk drives first. Tusk of Fury is our only S-rank defense W engine. Now, realistically speaking, if you have one copy of Caesar's personal W engine, you most likely have a Caesar to go along with it. Barring you have any extra copies, you've most likely overclocked them already too. I'm not going to be that person that's going to give you a star rail type of response and tell you to just run Caesar's weapon on Ben simply because of two things. A, he doesn't really benefit much from the effect, and B, I'd like to argue that either Seth's or his own personal are better in slot for his natural sub DPS playstyle. The extra 30% increase to his shields is okay, and all tanks want the team-wide buff like this, but I'd say if you have to use Ben for any type of endgame content, then you'd use him as a sub DPS or stunner rather than a team-wide buffer. But wait, doesn't this engine literally do what you just described, Rune? And to that I'd say yes, it does. But the problem is that a sub DPS Ben does not want to have as much field time as someone like Caesar would. Ben's most important part of his moveset is his counter, and if he doesn't have the energy every rotation to do an EX counter, follow-up attack, and then swap after, you really aren't getting the best usage out of him, especially with this weapon. His energy regen is abysmally slow, and his normal attacks are much worse. You want to have the least amount of field time on this agent so that you can maximize the stunner or DPS instead. That's why I believe Seth's weapon, Peacekeeper Specialized, is a better candidate than Caesar, simply because its availability is better and the effect is more usable for a sub DPS Ben build. The energy regen is pretty lackluster, but the attack percent main stat is very good to push his numbers higher. The anomaly buildup is probably the best thing about this engine for Ben, especially when ran with Inferno Metal. I still firmly believe that his best weapon in slot for his main playstyle is going to be his own big cylinder. Wait, no, not that cylinder. It's got the same availability as Peacekeeper, and the effect was literally made with Ben in mind. At overclock 5, this weapon deals an extra 960% damage that scales off of his defense, and this damage is guaranteed as a critical. This weapon makes clearing lesser super easy as the follow-up attack has a massive hitbox. However, the weapon sucks in stun phase because you need the enemy to hit you in order to proc the effect. I'd say that this is the only downside to this weapon because everything else about it is good for this character. The base attack is alright for A rank numbers, but the defense percent is insane considering that Ben can convert 80% of his defense into attack at max traces. And taking into account that his M2 gives him an additional 300% defense damage on his counter, with this weapon you can deal nearly 1300% additional damage that scales off of his defense. So considering that all this character wants to do is counter, this weapon is still by far the best choice for him if you don't plan to hyper invest in him. Moving on to the disk drives, we have 4 new sets to cover. Right off the bat, Ben does not want to be using the 4-piece sets of Astral Voice or Branch and Blade Song. Astral is strictly made for supports and BNBS is mainly for Miyabi and Ellen. But you can use either of the 2-piece sets if you have good main or substats on them. If you're going for a more supportive Ben, then Protopunk is a very good option. This set was made with defense units in mind, and that team-wide buff is very nice to have as well. But out of all of these, Chaos Jazz is the only new set that you could theoretically use for a sub DPS build. You'd have to run the 4-piece of it since his anomaly proficiency is very bad, but in theory, this set is just a hormone punk set but for electric and fire agents. And assuming you have big cylinder, 4-piece chaos, and 2-piece woodpecker, the damage from his EX counter is just barely underneath what 4-piece hormone can achieve. So it's ultimately up to how you want to play him. Chaos will allow him to be on field a lot more, especially with Lucy, and recently Astra, seeing as you could spam quick assist off of literally anything she does. But out of all of the sets in the game now, I'd like to argue that the best 4-piece for him is still going to be Infernal Metal. With characters like Soldier 11, Bernice, and Lighter, Ben only really has one place in the meta, and that's on mono fire teams. Since he's a 1.0 unit, his core passive only needs other fire agents in order to proc his crit rate buff, making his team synergy really limited, but we'll go over that later. The 2-piece is pretty flexible, but one thing I'd like to update from the original Ben guide is that you no longer want to be having 2-piece of Soul Rock anymore. He does convert 80% of his defense as attack, but recently I've learned that either Woodpecker, Branch and Blade Song, or Hormone are better options in slots simply because of how good it is to have more offensive stats, especially with the recent HP inflation this game is slowly gaining. I'll make a YouTube short going over the numbers between each 2-piece, so stay on the lookout for that. Moving on, CCZ also added some new endgame modes over the recent updates. Lost Void being a streamlined version of Hollow Zero, Simulated Battle Trial being the endless tower climbing mode, and Deadly Assault being a true DPS check with new boss fights and enhanced enemies. Looking at all of these modes, I'm going to give Ben a letter grade on how he performs in each of them. I'm going to assume that this is a level 55 to 60 Ben with at least one copy of Big Cylinder and core traces maxed out to F. Let's start with the first mode, Lost Void. I'd give Ben an A in this mode simply because it's just another version of Hollow Zero. In the original Hollow Zero, he was pretty dominant with a ton of fire resonium, but Lost Void changes things up a bit more to where he's not as powerful in this mode specifically. If you could get the fire resoniums in this mode, he'd easily be an S. Thankfully, Lost Void is just your standard roguelike game mode, and since he isn't a physical unit, he can still do some good damage to Bringer at the final battle. He does kind of fall off the more you heighten the intensity, but for what he's worth, I'd still say it's nice to use him every now and again. Here's hoping that he's one of the characters that gets new moves added to his kit as well. For Deadly Assault, I'm going to have to give him a B-. The only good thing about him in Deadly Assault is that he replaces Caesar on the Soldier 11 team, and gives your 9 agents a bit more wiggle room in terms of team comps. Right now, 11's best team is with Lighter and Caesar, but with Ben, I can replace Caesar with him so that I can get better cycles on Bringer or Pompey, and give my Caesar to my Jane team instead. Ben simply existing offers up a little bit more flexibility when it comes to choosing teams in this mode, and that is one of the few reasons why he's alright in Deadly Assault. The only other thing about this mode is that you do have to get your rotations down to a T to get all 3 stars. A bit challenging, but this is the endgame content for the game. As for the last mode, Simulated Battle Trial, I'm going to give him a big fat F. Okay, that's a little harsh. He's not that terrible in this mode, but he's definitely not great in it, and that's gonna warrant a D for him. This tower is endless, and because the amount of floors are infinite and Ben's health is not, he will eventually end up dying around the late 40s due to how hard enemies hit after floor 30. The enemies already hit hard enough past floor 25, and the shield that he gives after the follow-up attack is not enough to circumvent the damage he takes. Even if you play him perfectly and don't take any damage at all, you're still gonna end up taking damage from the counter and lose a considerable chunk of health because of it. If you need a tank for Soldier 11's team in tower, Caesar is by far the better option. And with that, we've covered all the new content in the game. Now let's go over team synergies. I'd like to say how absolutely insane it is that Ben secretly wants to be in the biker gang more than Billy does. But realistically, the comps with the Sons of Cadlon usually only come down to Lighter and Lucy. My favorite team being Soldier 11 and Lighter for sub DPS and Soldier 11 and Lucy for a pseudo stunner build, if I need to. I don't really like the idea of having Bernice with him, seeing as she'd need a second Sons of Cadlon character to proc her core passive. And you'd only ever run double tank with Caesar for a hyper carry Ben and have Lucy as the support. Lucy and Piper are still the best free-to-play team for him if you legit do not own 11 or any of the other Sons of Cadlon S ranks, but I highly doubt that that's the case considering how long the game's been out now. The thing that sucks the most about him being a 1.0 unit is that he's tied to either his element or faction in order to be able to get his passive. And all of the other Belobog units are kinda buns to use for endgame content, except for maybe Coleta. But by that point, you'd still use Lighter over her any day. Here's to hoping that Big Daddy gets in as a physical attacker that needs a defense unit and a unit with a defensive assist, so that way we can have the full-on furry team with Lycon. But that's on Major Copium. Ultimately, keep Ben around Soldier 11. He loves Soldier 11 and is her biggest fan, and you can swap out Sons of Cadlon characters like they're your favorite silicone toys. They're all interchangeable except for Bernice and Piper, to which you'd need to run another Sons of Cadlon character. After all of this, should you be using Ben bigger in the big year of 2025? The answer is that it literally does not matter. You can clear literally any bit of content in the game that is not timed with anyone on any W engine. This game allows so much more freedom and rewards player skill more than spending money that you could literally beat all of the story content with the first 3 characters you get. Ben is a great unit. You get him for free, and while there might be better units that exist, he is still more than capable of helping you clear mid to end game content with the right build. Don't feel discouraged about tier list and other people's opinions online. Play the game how you want to, but just know, if I see you guys mix and matching your disk drives again, I will personally come over to your house and— But with that being said, leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my YouTube channel if you want to see more gacha content, and support me on Ko-fi if you want to keep these videos going. Other than that, my name is Rune, and I will see you guys later. Ta-ta!